talking about the issues that we live with every day, issues that affect us, that shape us because they're shaping the world around us. I don't think we can learn how to live together in ways that are better expressions of the kingdom without talking about some things. And one of those issues that we need to talk about is racialization. You don't have to dig much or long to recognize this isn't just an issue from the past. It wasn't just happening when I was growing up. There are laws that keep us from harming and discriminating against each other. That is certain. But all I need to do is mention the town of Ferguson or the names Eric Gardner or Laquan McDonald, and it creates an immediate response, often emotional in us. Just this week, a judge is deciding whether the Illinois state attorney is handling the McDonald case appropriately in Chicago. And yesterday, I don't know whether you noticed, Congress Parkway was blocked, or Monday, by those who were protesting treatment of undocumented families. We all have our opinions related to these issues, but the question for us to navigate this morning is, how do people of the kingdom respond to these issues? People of faith called to live in a very specific way, shaped by the words of Paul in Galatians that you've already heard once this semester, when he said to a church struggling with issues like these, there is no longer Jew or Gentile, there's no slave or free, there's no male or female, you are all one in the Messiah, Jesus. So this semester we're seeking ways to live life better together. And we talk about stuff like this. Well, why do we do this? Well, I don't know if you remember. I remember last semester when we had our panel from Flint, and Ryan, who was one of our guests, called out white Christians. The response among you was pretty interesting for me. Again, speaking to the reason why I think we need to talk about this issue. And I'm grateful for a place like Olivet that allows us to have these type of conversations. So for our sake today, I want to kind of give us some working definitions, because there's a difference between racism and racialization. Racism is the belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority for a particular group of people. That's a disturbing definition that I think all of us would like to think that none of us have as a part of our makeup. But racialization is a little different. It's the process of assigning ethnic or racial identities based on a relationship, a social practice, or a group. It's often born out of the interaction of one group with another, where one group dominates the other and continues to perpetuate systems in a culture for the purpose of controlling the other group. Now, maybe you don't like the wording of either of those, but the truth is no one wants to admit or own up to a form of racism. I don't want to think I'm racist. I don't want to think I'm influenced by racialization. I don't want to think that I practice those things socially, or I'm a part of a system that supports those things. But Martin Luther King said over 50 years ago now that the most segregated time in the U.S. is Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. And I think one of the things that we have to wonder is, has that really changed over the last 50 years? And the truth is, if racialization affects our churches and the way we gather, it certainly affects us here, but way beyond here. So our conversation today is certainly to help us be better, to do life better together, but also to prepare us for life way beyond Olivet when we leave this place. So today, to help us with this conversation, I've asked some friends to come so they can start moving our way. And I want to introduce Sharon Norman and Jorge Bonila and Simone Twibell, who are going to come up. Would you welcome them this morning as they come? They'll be introducing themselves in just a second. So we're going to solve all the problems and answer all the questions related to this issue in 31 minutes, right? Right. But we are going to continue. This isn't the first time we've had this conversation. If you're a junior, senior, you know we did this 2 years ago with 3 of our students who were courageous enough to sit in front of you. And this is kind of a continuation of the same conversation that we want to be a part of our community so we can be better people of faith, not just here, but in our world. So I want you guys to just take a minute to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and I'll just stop and you can go.
Well, as he said, I am Sharon Norman, and I think it's most important for, the best way to explain where I'm from. I was born by by the river. No, I'm kidding. I was born in a hospital in Grand Rapids, Michigan, so I'm kidding. No, I am from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Lived there the majority of my life, and I culturally, my mom is a child of the 60s. And so, as with many folks who lived in the South, they migrated north because of hopes for a better life. And in moving north, one of the things that my aunt and my mom raised me, and the thing that was very important to them, was that their children could live in two worlds, because that was their experience. And so I went to predominantly white schools, but I worshiped in all black settings. So Monday through Friday, all white. On the weekend, all black. And so that was my life. And in the end, you know, God can use every scenario in your life. I'm convinced of that. And it was because of using, he used all of that. And so in 2002, I came to the Nazarene church and have served in the church since 2002, and primarily white settings. And so both churches that I've served in have probably been 80% white. And I'm home. I'm home. And there's a significance to that statement, in the fact that I don't have to look like everybody else in order to be home with my brothers and sisters in Christ. Amen. And so that's my story.
Thanks, Sharon. Jorge?
My name is Jorge. I was born and raised in Mexico City. I grew up in an orphanage in Mexico, and my parents were missionaries. So they went to Mexico and raised 30 of us, 30 kids in that home. And it was amazing. It was like going to camp with 30 people and staying there for 20 years. We had activities. Every day there was something going on. We were enforced to study, to do our chores. We had a farm at our home, and we used to milk the cows, kill the chickens, take care of the land. Hard work, but it was very, very beneficial for everybody.
Simone?
Very good. Perhaps the best way to tell you where I'm from is to tell you that I was born in Brazil, in Sao Paulo. When I was 2 months old, I moved to Buenos Aires, Argentina, where I grew up. And I was a child of missionaries, and I have a twin sister, so we grew up together in Argentina, but then we moved to Venezuela and then back to Brazil for 4 years until we had the opportunity to come to Olivet in 2002 to study. And some of the best years of my life were spent here in this campus, and so I have very fond memories. If it wasn't enough to study abroad as an international student, I decided that China would be a great adventure for me to explore the other side of the world, and so I went on a semester abroad to China, and then I just became fascinated with the Asian culture. Ended up getting married to an American, and now I am an American citizen, so good luck trying to find out where I'm from exactly. To this very day, when people ask me that, I just say my home is where I am currently, and Bourbonnais really is where I call home.
Yeah, and you recently moved from Kentucky, so...
Yeah, I was a pastor in Kentucky. So yes, I just moved back after 5 years.
Well, let me just tell you how this is going to kind of roll this morning. There is no order, there's no form. We're going to kind of talk all over each other because we spent an hour and a half together Tuesday, and that's just kind of the way we are, right? So we're very comfortable with that. So you guys kind of get to listen in to our conversation. But here's the question concerning where you're set from your experiences. What do you think are the greatest issues that we still face concerning racialization in the U.S. and in the church, maybe?
Who wants to start? Me? Okay. Honestly, from the position where I'm sitting as a sometimes it's very difficult to even think about what it means to be an immigrant today. I recognize that individuals migrate for various reasons, including factors such as opportunities, as well as necessity. A lot of people immigrate because of survival reasons. Now, in my particular experience, I immigrated because of opportunities. God has really blessed me through many various opportunities along the way. And so I sit in a position very different from the ones in which other Hispanics or immigrants sit in today. But we need to recognize that immigration really is a big issue, and we can't just ignore it because it's not going to go away. And as Christians, we need to find and formulate ideas by which we can address this issue. Now, I see, the immigration debate is really a very complex issue. And I'm by no means going to offer any solutions today. But I'm just simply going to say that we have about 42 million immigrants living in our midst, and about 12 or so million of them are undocumented. Now, we have to recognize, right, that as Christians, as people of the kingdom, we have certain responsibilities. And as I have been an immigrant myself, I have a great sense of responsibility because I have been given so much. I recognize that a lot of people struggle, and so it is difficult for them. But as immigrants, we have to, not as immigrants, as Christians, we have to see that, you see, when we find biblical perspectives or understandings, it helps us inform our response. And so what should our response be? Well, Leviticus 19:33 tells us, right, that we must love the immigrant as ourselves. Well, that's huge. But we see that's the very first step. We show a compassionate response to them, but we don't end there. Because it's easy just to say, well, I gotta love everybody, right, and accept everybody. But that's just sometimes easy to say and just simply leave there. But we must take it a step further. And as Romans 12 and Hebrews 13 tells us, we must practice hospitality. And we must encounter the cultural other as individuals who are made in the image of God and who need to be respected and be dignified. And so we need to oppose any sort of thing that mistreats human beings, whether they're immigrants or not, documented or undocumented, and we must begin there. However, I think that as Christians, we need to take it even a step further and begin to analyze, right, what is happening in this situation. Because, okay, 12 million undocumented immigrants are living in our midst, but what about the millions of people who are still out in their context, living under poverty, suffering, and even at this very moment considering the idea of risking their own lives to come to a place like ours because of a better opportunity? So what do we do about that? What do we do about them? Should we wait until they get here to help them? Of course not. We got to do something for people that are out there and meet them in their contexts and meet them and help them to bring the compassion and the love of Christ for people where they are. So that would be my response.
Yeah, and what can you say after all of that, right? I mean, she's right. And I think one of the things that we need to do is we have so many assumptions about other cultures and other races, and sometimes that gets in the way of really connecting with somebody that we're going to learn something. My neighbor is a Muslim, and at our home it's funny because when we have food and we have a party, sometimes we have a lot of food and we just send them to the neighbors. So, okay, you can have the salsa and the beans and the rice and everything. But then they do the same thing. They walk to our house and they bring a full plate of interesting food, right? They probably say the same thing when they see our food. But we have built this relationship that I don't have to make assumptions that, they're my neighbors and I'm just watching for them or whatever. I just have to love them because I'm a Christian. And I think that's what God is expecting me to do versus making an assumption that they're going to be against me or they're going to be against us and things like that.
I think one of the issues I think we face is that the church, we in the church, have far too long over-identified with our nationalities or our citizenships as Americans, or I think we've overemphasized that, and we have forgotten that first we are citizens of heaven. The politics of heaven are very different than the politics on earth. And I think when we consume ourselves or we elevate one thing over the other, we lose sight of what would God say in this? How would God have us respond in this? I think it's easy to get wrapped up in where we're from and forget whose we are. And that should be the thing that drives us first. That should be the thing from which we filter our decisions, our ideas, our choices, who we will interact with, who we won't interact with. That list becomes a lot smaller of who we won't interact with when there is a kingdom mindset. And I think in some ways we lose sight of that. As especially, we live in a very, very technological age where everything is at our hands at that quick. I mean, everything we need to see, everything we know is right in front of us. And the thing is, we as the people of God are not controlling the media. But yet, we rely a lot on the media for information. And we filter it. We tend to filter it from a perspective here on earth, not one of heaven. And I think that causes some of the issues of assumption, some of the issues of, well, I should stand on this side of immigration. I should stand on this side of Ferguson. I should stand on, what does God say? This is breaking the very heart of God. So how should that impact us before anything else?
Yeah, interesting, speaking of assumptions, I want to get back just to give you guys a seed, to unpack hospitality a little bit and what that looks like for people of faith. But to talk about assumptions, and we were talking Tuesday, if I can be transparent and real with you, I looked at Sharon and I said, in talking about the Laquan McDonald thing, I said, now I'm sure you have different feelings about Laquan McDonald than I do. And you said,
are you sure?
Yeah. I made an assumption, right, because I'm white and Sharon's black, that her opinions about Laquan McDonald would be different than mine. And I think sometimes we do that too often with each other. Instead of having conversations as people of faith, people shaped in the way of Jesus, as human beings, we put assumptions on each other because of what I assume you're going to think because of your ethnicity or your race. I made that mistake Tuesday, and we unpacked that a little bit, and we had some conversation related to that Tuesday, didn't we?
And we're still friends.
We are friends, and I like that. The fact that we extend grace to each other and realize sometimes we trip over our own tongues, right? And trying to have real conversations, and we make mistakes. And I made a mistake, and we still are friends. Yeah, but let's unpack hospitality a little bit about what that looks like for people of faith living in the way of Jesus, and I don't really care what order we go in. What does hospitality look like? Jorge, you kind of unpacked it a little bit of living with a Muslim neighbor.
Yeah, and I think we're, growing up in a home where we were 30 of us, and we went to church on Sundays. Sunday church was about 8 hours, or 4 hours, 5 hours. You never knew.
Which that drives us crazy, okay?
Yeah.
The 5-hour church services, we're looking at our watch after 45 minutes, so I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Right? Am I wrong? Come on, we got lunch to go to, right? I'm getting hungry here.
So I got married, and my wife works here. She's a professor of Spanish. And our first year was really rough because I was coming from a culture, Mexican culture, and she's from Crete, Illinois. And I was having people all the time in my house, all the time. And she was getting tired of that. She's like, hey, we need to have time alone. But for me, I grew up having people around me. So community for us was so valued. We valued it so much that we just want to embrace all of them. And that's how it's for me.
That's great. Very good.
I think being a person from the perspective of, I've been serving at Kankakee First Church for 2.5 years now. And before that, I was at Grand Rapids International Fellowship. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Thank you. And so, But one of the things that the evolution of my journey in the Nazarene Church is that God blessed me to be with folks like John Seaman, who is the district superintendent there. And John Seaman came from Africa. He was a missionary in Africa, so I was like home for him. So, you know, he was happy. And Joe Knight. God surrounded me with great folks in the church who never made me feel as a visitor in the church. I've sat at tables with folks in our districts and where I am the only person who is not white. And I have not had instances where I have been expected to act anything different than who I am and all that comes with me in the setting of these individuals. And so I have appreciated in my experience, and I have to say my experience because I get that my experience is not everyone. I have been fortunate to be on the receiving end of great hospitality and being loved on and encouraged to do and be exactly who I am in this church. And it has been an absolute joy for me because if anybody has had the experience of being in what we would say a traditional Black worship experience or church culture, you know it's a little different than, yeah, I hear that chuckle. Go ahead and laugh out loud. So you know it's different. And pretty much wherever I am going to do me. And if God moves me to shout hallelujah, I'm going to shout hallelujah. I don't care if I'm in a Catholic church, it just doesn't matter. And so let me say why that's important, because I have had the benefit of being around people who have said, just be you. Just be you. The great thing about hospitality, the important thing about hospitality, is we encourage people to be exactly who they are, even if it makes us a little uncomfortable. And I know that my shout may make some folk uncomfortable. I get it. And so I try to tone it down when necessary, but only when necessary. Only absolutely when necessary. But, I just want to add, there are two men who have been pivotal in my journey in the Nazarene Church because I've had to work closely with them. And if we go back to assumptions, that's Steve Martin, who I would call him my Uncle Mordecai. And if anybody know in the book of Esther, Mordecai kind of prepared her for what it was that God was calling her to do. Steve Martin, if you looked in the dictionary for man who is white, it is Steve Martin. He is, it just is what it is. And I don't mean that to offend anybody, but he is like the whitest white guy I know. And I love him. And he never asked me to be anything different, because I'm sure he said, if you look in the dictionary under the blackest Black woman you've ever met, it's her. And so, but we worked together for 11 years. We couldn't have been polar opposites. An idea of heaven for him is Ovid Young on an organ, just him listening. An idea of heaven for me is Albertina Walker rolling on the floor singing some songs. We were polar opposites. And that was a man that God used to help shape me in leadership in ministry. Polar opposites. And then the other man, which our relationship has been shorter in time, but very significant, that is Don Reddick. And Don Reddick has been the kind of blessing, exactly. Don Reddick has been the person who says, Sharon, you are who you are. Your strengths are what they are. You work from your strengths, and that's what we do. Now, it's so funny, Don and I joke, where Steve was like who he was, Don, I don't think sometimes know that he is white. And so I have to remind him, I am the Black person in this scenario. And so, these two, just in case you didn't know that. Yeah. We say ebony and ivory, and he'll say, which one am I? Really, dude? But both of these guys, both of these men, very different. Very different. Look the same. Very different. Told me to be myself. And that is the best thing I can offer to anyone else. Just be yourself.
Well, I think we've touched on it a little bit, but let's talk about what you guys from your perception see as, for those of us shaped by Jesus, people of faith. What are some barriers that you see for us in addressing racialization? What are some hurdles that we need to get over?
Well, I think obviously a natural barrier when it comes to understanding the Hispanic culture or Latino culture and the dynamics between us and the Americans is definitely the language plays a role as a barrier. Sometimes we are afraid of encountering somebody who looks different than us because we may not understand exactly what they're saying. And so I think a lot of the obstacles have to do with fear. We are just afraid of approaching what's different. We are sometimes ignorant in knowing what to do exactly in a situation that may be unfamiliar or perhaps even a little bit uncomfortable. And so I think those are the natural barriers in any intercultural encounter or dynamics that we have to overcome as Christians.
And I would like to add too that we take everything personally. There's so many things that we take personally, and sometimes you just have to be curious instead of judgmental and really go back and listen to their stories, listen to what is behind that action or that person. And I think you'll be amazed of how much you can learn from somebody else. So.
I think one thing I would, from the seat of my experience, and I would say this definitely to every African American student in this room. One of the things we tend to get offended by is when we are asked questions that seem in our mind stupid. Like, really, why would you ask me that? You know, and that is kind of, but here's the thing. If people don't know, who else will they ask but the source? And even if it feels like what would be a stupid question, I've had hair questions, which, you know, do you like have to wash your hair all the time? Well, no, baby. If I wash my hair all the time, it will fall out. They just don't know. There's just things you don't know. And if, unfortunately, stereotypes have a little piece of truth in them. And the problem with stereotypes is that we apply a stereotype to everyone, and we assume that little piece of truth goes to everybody, and they don't. And in order for people to kind of dismantle some of those stereotypes, we have to have a conversation. We have to be willing. I remember having a conversation with a sister, and she said to me, you know, I saw this worship leader. He was African American, and he was doing... He was singing on stage, and he was so articulate, and I can't help wonder if he had been adopted. Now, don't get offended by that. That's her worldview. Now, I have a responsibility to say, baby girl, let me help you with something. Let me help you. We have many African American men and women who know how to raise their children to have an intelligent conversation. And it isn't called speaking white, it's just speaking English. And we know how to do that. We know how to do that. But in our setting, she didn't walk away feeling bad. That is the key. That is the key. Yeah. You don't know. If you don't know, ask. And what better person to ask than the source? And the other thing I would say is I don't answer for all black people, but the answers I have, I'll give you. I don't answer for everybody. I can't tell you why brothers wear their pants sagging. My husband does not. And my children, if I had a son, he would not either. But that don't make a brother bad because he does. You know, I can't speak for why he does it. Ask him. And don't be afraid to answer the question on either side. Because I'll tell you, one of the questions I would have, why do white people have green bean casserole at Thanksgiving? I'm just saying. And so, I'm just curious. curious, how did y'all come up with that tradition and the little crispy onions on top? You know what I'm saying? Can you help me out there? Do you have green bean casserole at him?
Yes.
So sick.
It's good. I don't know. I like the turkey onions on top of my green bean casserole, all right? I don't know. Where do cranberries come from? I don't know. I just eat it because it's good and Mom put it in front of me. You guys help her out. I mean, if I'm answering, I don't want to answer for you either, right? I'm just answering for me. Okay. Where do I go? I don't know. All right. We've kind of been talking about it here too, but this is kind of where we need to wrap the conversation up. And if you had to answer the question, how can we begin to do life better together or do life better together, how would you answer that question for our students and for our community?
I think it's important to begin, as I think it was mentioned earlier, to be able to extend grace to one another. And when we do make those mistakes, then just extend grace and develop an attitude of humility. I remember in one particular occasion, I was at a conference, and I had been invited to preach at a church. It was actually all black. And it wasn't here, but it just don't make any, assumptions. But I remember that I was supposed to be picked up and taken to the church, and I was all by myself. And so the person came and was looking for the speaker, right? And I said, well, are you here to pick me up? And he said, oh, you are the preacher? And all sorts of things came into my mind. I know I look young. I know I'm Hispanic. I'm a woman. All these, stereotypes or qualifiers, but if I had focused on that, if I had simply focused on, the stereotypical or even like prejudice that sometimes is associated with those comments, I would have just place a barrier between us. But I just said, Lord, I just give it to you, and I move on, and I allow your spirit to work through this situation and bless this man through my preaching. And I just preached, and at the end, we just had a wonderful time together. And sometimes it is developing an attitude of humility and recognizing, not taking it personally, as Jorge said, not just looking beyond, looking above those obstacles and extending grace to one another.
Yep. The reality is that you're going to walk out of Olivet, and you're going to buy a house, or you're going to rent an apartment, and your neighbor's going to be different than you are. So what are we going to do about it? I think that we need to, as a church, as that responsibility that we have to love one another means to serve, to act, to do something about it. So if the neighbor is undocumented and he doesn't have any papers, but he needs food, we give them food. If he needs shelter, we give them shelter. And I think that's what God is asking us to do, to be responsible with what we have and serve. And I think that's something that we need to do more in the church, as an individuals, wherever we are. Really quick, I was at a cafeteria today, and there was a lady. I was throwing my plate on the garbage can, and she spoke to me in Spanish right away. She knew that I think I look like Hispanic, and she said, please go to school, do a good work hard, study hard. We Mexicans don't want to study, and that I started thinking about it, and that's another assumption, that we have, and then she had, and I said, no, don't worry, I work here. And she was like, but she was encouraging me, and to the point that she even gave me a hug. And I gave her a hug as well. But I walk out of that conversation really encouraging her, and she encouraging me. And I think that's what we need to do.
I learned a great lesson from Dr. Sam Vassell, who is the pastor at a Nazarene church in the Bronx. And he did a class called Nazarene ... and black ? And I saw that, and I was like, I gotta go to this class. And so I go to this class, and he said something that is just it put words to something for me that is very clear. And he said, we all have adjectives in our lives. Black, Nazarene, Christian, woman. These are all descriptors of us. And he said the problem becomes when we begin to live life, the adjective becomes the most important thing. And he said the reality is for all humanity, our noun is that we have been created in the image of God. That should be the thing that becomes our filter in all things. The adjectives that are attached to us have helped to shape us, but if we live by our adjectives, the thing we risk in doing is viewing all life from that perspective. This is how, for me, that became a significant thing. I was doing a camp, leading worship at a camp meeting, and a man comes up to me and he says, oh, I love your singing. I just love your singing. Where are you guys? Where are you from? And I was like, well, I'm from Grand Rapids. I serve in the Nazarene Church in Grand Rapids. He said, no. Where are your people from? It's like, well, my mom is from Mississippi, and, you know. And then he said, no. When did you guys get here on the boat? Now, had I filtered only from the perspective of a black person, I would have lost my religion that day. And I would not have been invited back. But because I understand that my noun is created in the image of God, I could see past that moment, later to learn that he is a man with special needs. This is the same man that told me the next year that he had the gift of teleportation. And so, every time he sees me, he hugs me like we're best friends. And he reminds me that he keeps listening to the Black Gospel Station because those are the things that get him through. Had I lived out of my adjective, I would have missed the opportunity to be salt and light to a man who needed to know that God loved him. Amen. My question is, what is more important? And that is the part when you leave here, your adjective is only a part of you. It's not all of you. And what God has for you is for you, and that doesn't change because of your adjective. It's shaped by your noun. Amen. You are created in his image, period. How you perceive the world may be shaped by some of those things, but how you live out life, how you take people in, should be from that noun. Amen. And I think that's the question we have to ask ourselves. What am I living on? My adjective or my noun? My adjective or my noun? As a believer in Christ, created in the image starts at conception. When he created you, formed you, Psalm 139, it starts there. And so the Christian part influences how I fully understand that now. And I understand there are people in this room who may not be Christians. We have a fundamental and foundational thing that connects us all. We were created in his image. Doesn't matter the color, the gender, the educational background. It doesn't matter. We have one foundational, fundamental thing that connects us. If we don't learn to draw from that, we will destroy ourselves.
That's right. Amen.
Well, I hope that as you leave, that you're able to get beyond barriers like fear and false assumptions, and that we learn to live from our nouns and not our adjectives. And would you thank our friends today for helping us with this conversation? One thing I want to say to you as well is part of the reason they were chosen is they're a part of our community. They love this place. They're invested in this place. They're on this campus often, and I encourage you as you see them to engage them in conversation as well as each other. May we be gracious in our conversation with each other, and may the Lord help us today as we walk throughout this day. Thanks. You're dismissed.